Today, I find myself reflecting on resilience. What actually is resilience? Resilience is often described as the ability to bounce back from adversity, to withstand challenges, and to emerge stronger. Stephen McRae, a principal dancer at the Royal Ballet London, was my guest on the podcast this week, and we discussed how this concept of resilience resonates profoundly in his world of the performing arts, where the pressures of physical demands, emotional investments, and the pursuit of perfection can lead to significant challenges. I am and always have been so interested in resilience, or what some people call grit. Why do some individuals appear more resilient than others? Am I resilient? Why am I resilient? Why can some people bounce back from challenging times and others struggle to move forward? When I ask myself if I'm a resilient person, the answer is absolutely yes. But why? When I was going through my cancer journey, I did always have a positive mindset. I never asked why me, just what now. From very early on, I was quick to reframe the why me to the what now. How can I use my experience to help others? And here I am. The many high performers I've met on the podcast since inception have often gone through something challenging earlier in their lifetime. And there is a hypothesis that the difficult times that they have been through then leads them to become more resilient individuals, which is what allows them to go on to push themselves and achieve incredible things in their sport, on the stage, their workplace, etc. But why am I resilient? I had a loving and supportive upbringing. I was very lucky. I had most material things I needed. But I did grow up with two brothers, and I laugh with them now because they used to tease me for being a girl. They used to steal my bras and tell their friends my bra size, laugh at me for having periods, and so forth. So this is what I now affectionately call the bullying from my two brothers growing up, which potentially helped to create a more resilient streak in me. I've always felt empowered being a woman and passionate about gender equality, which would likely be a result of being brought up as the only girl surrounded by two bullying brothers. This is an example where a challenge has led to me being stronger and determined to prove people wrong. What about the nature-nurture question? How much of grit is in our genes? Science has made huge strides in figuring out how our genes, our experiences, and their interplay make us who we are. But I think the honest answer is that we get resilience in part from our DNA and in part not. So how can we learn to be more resilient? I read the book Grit by Angela Duckworth when I started this podcast, and there were a few things which took my interest. She quotes the philosopher Nietzsche, who says, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." But actually, do some things actually make us weaker? Like it says in Angela Duckworth's Grit, when does struggle lead to hope? And when does it lead to hopelessness? She talks about a scientific experiment done a few years ago with rats, where one group got electric shocks, but if they turned a small wheel with their front paws, they were able to turn off the shock. The second group received the same amount of shocks, but had no control over their duration. These rats were only 5 weeks old, which equates to being adolescents in a rat's life, which is a bit different to other similar studies which have been done on mature rats. Both groups of rats were assessed 5 weeks later when they were all mature rats. At this point, they were both subjected to uncontrollable electric shocks and the next day observed in a social exploration test. What the scientists learned was that the adolescent rats who had experienced stress, those who had no control, so those who couldn't turn off their electric shocks, grew up to be adult rats who, after being subjected to uncontrollable shocks a second time, behaved timidly. They learned to be helpless in the same way that another rat would. But in contrast, the rats who experienced stress that they could control, so those who were able to turn off their electric shocks, grew up to be more adventurous and showed resilience behaviours. So when the rats could control what was happening throughout the stressful period, this made them stronger for life. The scientists go on to explain about neuroplasticity and that if you experience significant adversity in your youth and you have been able to overcome it on your own, you go on to deal with adversity better later in life. But it's more than just telling kids that they can overcome things if they put their mind to it. For the brain rewiring to occur, you have to experience mastery at the same time as adversity. So you need to learn by doing. That if I do something to change this, then something good will happen. I find that so interesting. I often ask my podcast guests if they feel they are resilient people. I'm quite interested by their responses. One guest said to me, absolutely, but went on to describe how she thinks it's sad that we're expected to be resilient in this world. And actually, she would prefer not to have to worry about being resilient. I like this concept, and I actually agree with her here to a degree. Sometimes I think when we undergo something challenging, we try and be strong and put a brave face on. Whereas we need to be better at feeling the feels, feel the emotions, and then go on to deal with what's happened. Because, like the great Edith Egar says, you can't heal what you don't feel. If we use the science I just talked about, we can then go on to make positive changes and come back stronger and show your resilience. I hope you enjoyed some of the reflections I've had today on resilience. Click here to listen to more resilient guests on the podcast and follow here so you don't miss my new podcast episodes on a Tuesday and new reflection videos on a Friday. Thanks for listening.